Welcome one and all to a new episode of MyRPG podcast. In this episode, my good friend Jens Reineking joins me to talk about the roles of PCs in RPGs. Enjoy. Welcome one and all to a new episode of MyRPG podcast. Today's guest is my good friend Jens Reineking. Jens, will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jens Reineking, Mr. Rock and Roll on the internet, and I'm from Germany, as you probably can tell from my accent. And I've been playing RPGs for a few years now, and I'm very excited to be on the show.
And it's always good to have Jens on. Herr Hangout here is one of my best friends, internet friends from the past couple of years. And he's going to give us an interesting perspective here because Jens not only plays RPGs, but he also has a background in acting. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been doing amateur theater for 25 years now.
And who better than to bring on to talk about the role of a player in an RPG. So first things first, let's just get the general kind of heading of how this is going to work. If you've heard the Game Master episode previously, I'm going to bring forth a couple of statements, and we're going to kind of discuss the merits of each of these statements that's tied to being a player. So the first statement that I kind of want to start off right off the bat is, as a player, the story is all about you. Agree, disagree, what do we think?
Yeah, disagree and agree. So it's a mixed bag. Because obviously I'm the central part of my story, but if I don't appreciate what the others are doing and sometimes taking myself back, no one will have a good time, and that's the whole point.
Yeah, I think the inherent idea as you come forward in a role-playing game, 2/3 of RPG is role-playing. So you want to play a role, and you want your role to be important, but just by virtue of the fact that there's other people at the table or on the digital interface, whatever you're using, you have to be conscientious of when it's not you're not the focus. Your story is maybe on the back burner for a little bit. And I think a lot of this comes from, and we both, I think, have my mind's significantly smaller than your background in improv theater. It's the idea of yes and first, which is playing along with whatever somebody else kind of comes up with as a premise. And secondly, it's the idea of trying to enhance the other person in whatever scene you're in, or in this case, in whatever game we're in, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to... So if I see somebody who's kind of going down a line in a trek, it would be wrong of me in an improv and it'd be wrong of me in an RPG if I was a player to go like, well, then my person steps in and does this and takes center stage. Realistically, you kind of want to feed them to continue on to whatever avenue or storyline or arc they're trying to pursue, hoping then that they would do the exact same thing for you when it comes to your time to follow up with your amazing, dark, brooding backstory or whatever it is you've brought.
Yeah, I always feel like it's a bit of I've got a dual personality when I'm playing. So one part is the character, and the other part is a player who's kind of keeping the meta level in view, and is going, okay, normally my character would now step in and do that, but I'm consciously deciding not to act out the character at this specific moment, because it's someone else's moment to shine. Or the other way around, the scene is completely stuck, something's not moving forward, and then I'm deciding, okay, normally my player would be a bit more subdued in this moment, but because nothing's happening, I'm going to tweak the character a bit and step in and try to move things forward.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of funny because, with an acting background, where your point is to come in. You know what your cue is to come into a scene. But as a RPG player, and a lot of us aren't naturally actors who have improv training. I happen to have a small bit from school. You have extensive bits of it, but I think the majority of people who plays RPGs aren't actors. So they're having to learn this skill, no previous background, right at the table. So it's kind of an interesting thing to learn, of course, a handbook, and to learn rules, and we'll talk about rules in a second, to learn rules and create your own character, but then also to have to learn how all these other people work and when is the opportune time to speak up and when's not the opportune time, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the best idea is let me put an example forward. So we were in our current campaign, we had to find a wizard because we had a problem, and he was reputed as not as a dark wizard, but dangerous. And so everyone was standing around the tower across from his tower in a corner and discussing, we would do some surveillance, maybe hire the local thieves guild to figure out how to get in. And I was going, oh no, this will take forever, and no one came to a decision. Then I decided, okay, let's move this forward. Can I find a way that is still within my character, but move the scene forward? I said, okay, he's been acting really rash and really impulsive over the last months. So I just left the group standing at the corner, walked over, and knocked at the wizard's door, while everyone else was still figuring out how to even find out if he's home. And the door got open, we got some nice tea, and the story moved forward. So that was a really fun moment, but the challenge for me was, okay, noticing nothing's happening and finding a way to move the story forward, but use what has been established about my character.
Yeah, and that perfectly ties into another one of the statements I kind of wanted to come up with, which is every session you should know what your character is going to do. Now, this statement is kind of, I'm going to, agree and disagree, right? Because a lot of these statements are bold enough that we can both do that. I will say that this one in particular, however, I think this is the one that's, I think, the easiest for me to kind of find fault with, is because so much of what your character does in an RPG is actually not about their story. It's about kind of justifying why you're in this group, justifying your relationships with the people there, and then you as a meta perspective, you as a PC justifying, well, how do we find out whatever the next step or move is, meta arc is, that these people want to do? Because like you mentioned, sometimes you will curtail a reaction not based off of what your character would have done, but because you want to see the momentum move forward. So you might have an idea of like, oh, well, we're about to go into that wizard's tower. Maybe we're either going to fight him or get an item for him. That might be your plan coming in, but instantly somebody might bring in something different or want to run away from the tower and then hear about the lost maiden in the woods. And now your game's taken a 180-degree turn, and you have to react to that accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm trying to have kind of, well, not necessarily a goal for the session, but kind of have a general direction in which I'm heading with the character. So like having a landmark or compass in mind, so I can navigate the session.
And I'd have to ask you personally this, when you create your characters, I know obviously we come in, we're anticipating everything's going to be changed up, and then it's going to be drastically different because of the influence of the other players and whatever the GM has in mind, he or she has in mind. But do you ever have the idea of like, here's a character at level 1 or, power 0.1, 100 or whatever, but I really wanted eventually to get to this point or hit these beats. Do you kind of already think of the last chapter when you create the first chapter?
No, not really. But my favorite character has been a samurai I played in Legends of the Five Rings, and I came up with a really strong idea of his general character, of his main flaw and motivation,
mm-hmm.
and that drove his development. And then seeing what happened in the story, I looked then at the rules and, okay, I want to progress, and with what's happened, what kind of new direction or change of direction do the rules allow, do the advancements allow?
See, that's actually similar to something I've had as a game master myself. One of my players come up to me. I've had a player come up to me with a concept that wasn't tied to the system we were talking about. He goes, "Hey, how can I do?" It was Arrow. If you're a fan of the DC Green Arrow, Green Arrow. He came to me and he was like, "Hey, I really love Green Arrow. Is there such a thing in this game in Dungeons and Dragons?" It was what I was playing at the time, and I was like, I mean, sort of Ranger, but Ranger's kind of a little more woodsy. You're looking for more trick shotty stuff, which is not exactly like a martial fighter. So I went onto the internet and I tried to find a combination or see if anybody had done a sort of build like that. And I explained to him like, okay, you won't be able to do all the cool Oliver Queen stuff at level 1, but the way this is created, the way this is blocked out is if we get to certain levels, you're going to feel way more and more like Green Arrow. And that's kind of, while not him obviously knowing what he wanted to, like how the story beats were going to end and whether he was going to retire or die valiantly on the battlefield and, level 1,000 or 10, he had an idea though of what he wanted his character to become, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's to that question or to that concept of like knowing how you want the end to be. I think you can have an idea of what you want your character to be capable of, and then it's all about communication with your game master, because he or she is the person who ultimately would say like, "Oh yeah, here's how I can facilitate that," or "I take that into consideration. Hopefully, I can work the story in that way."
Yeah, exactly. I've done this extensively with my current D&D fighter I'm playing. So between sessions, I've often emailed back and forth with my GM to figure out, okay, this has happened, and now advancement and a bigger advancement is in the cards. So what do we do? What would be fitting to develop this fighter in the further in the way that's been happening? And it's kind of a homebrew D&D system based on Edition 1.
Nice. Going way back.
Which is just really weird. So we house rule practically everything when we advance. There's just no stuff to look up. And so we intensively discuss. So now there's a new level, new advantages, new tools, new weapons, whatever. So how do we do this? And how do we balance it out? And how does it tie to the backstory? And is it even possible in the world we have established?
That's interesting. So there's a lot of systems that are not laissez-faire when it comes to like rules or classes or abilities, but like the Open Legend system, which is one I've played in before, will literally just say like, describe the series of actions you're going to take, and then I'll determine which one of your abilities that's tied to and then make a roll. And I've played in another system before that was, it's a very small, it was an indie system called OVA, which is like an anime system, where literally it's all D6 based. And at one time, I think I was rolling like my 12d6 versus somebody's 16d6. It was very stupid. But the entire thing is you look at all your character abilities and stuff like that, and you go, well, the reason I justify I should get an advantage and get more d6 is because I'm really, really wealthy. Also, I'm neurotic. And I'm also OCD. And I have this. And so, like, you and your GM are doing this dance back and forth. Like, you're right, you do get that, so I'll give you your additional, 4d6 for that. But my character happens to be, a noble, so he's not impressed by your money, so he'll get an additional. But like, it's this kind of funny, constant back and forth to where I don't think we were ever playing the game correctly, but it just got to that point. I think somewhere in the game, it's like only certain things applied to combat or only certain things applied to social interaction checks. But it got to a certain point to where I was like, sure, why not? Tell me how money makes you better at striking with a sword.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to play a system like that.
Yeah.
We're using that in between, so we're setting up the next thing, and then we follow the rules. There's not much discussing around the tables to fudge or to adjust the rules during play. So we try to do it all beforehand.
Speaking of awesome segues, another one of our great statements that we can talk about here is, as a player, you should have read the rule book before you start the first session.
Well, speaking as myself, yes. Speaking generally, Not the whole book. Being me, I will probably have at least skimmed the whole book because I'm kind of tend to over-prepare.
Mm-hmm.
And also I like to know what I'm doing so that the rules won't get in the way of the play.
Yeah.
But usually I think it's enough to, familiarize yourself with, if the setting is there, you should know the basic of the settings, and you should know, if it's D&D, for example, you should know that the basic check is a D20 and how to do that.
I've always made the point to my characters that my player characters, but I don't ever anticipate them to know all the in and outs of a handbook. I mean, I don't want you to know every equipment thing and how much it costs and what level unlocks, blah, 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 blah. However, if it pertains to your character, I think you should know it. Because I'm trying to wiggle, all my knowledge from the various systems I've played in the world and the NPCs and the voices, and then all of your skills and abilities, and then my monsters that are fighting. There's a lot of, plates in the air that I'm trying to do. So I rely on you then to, if you announce a thing and I go, wait, how's that work? What does that do again? I want you to at least know that. Or if you're going to imply that you have an ability or a item, I want you to be able to give me a description of that just so then I can at least understand that, like, okay, that's fine, that's good, or like, maybe that's a bit too much, not right now, you shouldn't have that or use that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the book that I looked at the most are the Legend of the Five Rings. Because we changed from 3rd edition to 4th edition during our campaign. So we had to relearn some stuff, but also because I got to a point where I tried to plan a bit ahead my advancement. And so I tried to find within the rules the stuff that would complement my character ideas. So I was really reading and rereading some of the schools and some of the weapons and skills just to figure out what would be the best flavor to add to my character. But I got a bit obsessive. But it's also nice, I think, for the GM. It can be nice to have someone at the table who can say, okay, deal with that. I look up the rules. I know approximately words in the book. I'm looking it up. We can do this later. Just deal with another player in the meantime.
That's actually one of the statements that I wanted to talk about. And one of the few ones I think I agree with almost wholeheartedly. Do not call the GM out on a rules issue or conflict in the middle of the game. While I know sometimes, everyone is fallible and he or she or they can make a mistake while running the game, I think it breaks the verisimilitude or the immersion if all of a sudden you break out the handbook or the text or your phone to be like, but wait, technically, and, if there's a subtle way you can do it that possibly, will not ruin the flow, sure, absolutely. I've seen people who bring note cards to the table so you can pass secret messages between you and the game master. That way, like, if you were to do the note card approach, he or she can look down, see that, and then go, actually, I'm incorrect. But to openly declare and kind of strike against whatever the GM or DM is doing at the time, I feel like is probably one of the biggest cardinal offenses.
It really depends on your relationship to the GM. So if you're saying both, okay, yeah, we know this works, but we both don't know how, you can kind of, like I said, just, okay, deal with someone else. I'm looking it up, and then we can do my scene or my bit. And sometimes as a player you have really prepared stuff and you want to pull out of certain thing, and that's why I when in doubt I defer to the GM. Mm-hmm. But there are points where I'm saying, okay, I actually know that this would work. This is what I built my character for. Now I can't do it. That kind of stinks, and it stinks. It stinks as well. But but if it gets too long, I'm going to say, okay, yeah, let's find something else. Doing whatever.
Well, that's one of the cases, though. I'll say, like, well, so my interpretation of this was like, in the middle of a battle or something's happening currently where everybody's involved, you stop and you go, that's incorrect, and you grab the book and you like. I like your approach of like, if let's say it's not your turn or somebody's if somebody's on a character beat and you're not involved, you subtly kind of doing that and being like, oh, actually no, on this page is where the answer is. And then if you could communicate that to the GM or DM, not interrupting the flow. My whole thing is I've always worried about the idea of like in an improv, nobody in improv goes, stop, hold up, time out, guys. What are we doing again? So I didn't like what could you have done a different response? Like that breaks, that's the opposite of yes and, it's no but. So the way I kind of run my games is typically I'll if I don't know a ruling, I'll ask somebody like, hey, could you just look that up real quick? I don't know, or I'm just gonna rule it like this and I'll figure it out later. But if we're in the middle of something, an interruption like that to argue over a rules thing, I'm usually a little bit more harsh than if you were to wait 5 minutes and then tell me about it. And then if I made the mistake, and I do all the time, I killed a character not too long ago, and then somebody came back and said, I totally made a mistake. I actually had this ability which would have saved my life. And I'm like, damn it. Do you want me to go back and like try to rectify that, or are you cool moving forward? And they moved forward with it, which, was really mature of them. But I also would have understood if they went like, yeah, I had this ability. I should have gotten out of there. I don't want my character to die. And I would have been like, that was my bad.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the group I've been playing in the most, we are kind of scattered all across Germany, but we still meet to play face-to-face. But we only meet a few times a year, so our sessions tend to be really long. So we have breaks, so we can kind of do this rule stuff in the breaks if something's coming up. So that's also easy. But the story, anecdote you just told, is a pet peeve of mine, because one of my strong opinions is, if you're going to play a role-playing game, you should absolutely prepared for your character to suffer and die.
Perfect. That's one of these other statements. We're going to talk about it. Do not get super connected to your character. You're more than likely going to die. So you have the belief that you should be ready for your character to die.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't want him to die, and I sometimes get kind of attached to my characters, but this is an adventurer. I'm not playing an office worker. I'm playing a samurai, a fighter, combat magician, or whatever. This is an adventurer who goes out, proactively seeks out danger and mysteries. So, and what's the thrill of an adventure movie, for example, or TV series? It's a danger. And if I'm not willing to risk anything, why I'm playing the game.
And what's interesting about that is not too long ago, I saw a Twitter poll from one of the kind of RPG sphere's biggest kind of talking heads, Matthew Colville, where he asked, in regards to D&D, of course, because he's, D&D adjacent, he asked, like, by, I think, 6th or 7th level, should there be at least one player character death in your party? And it's various things like, yes, totally, more than one, no, unless they're idiots, or none at all, And the vast majority of people said no unless they're idiots. So there's an assumption. Now, mind you, this is just an isolated sample size. But I think in modern gaming, because we've gotten very like role play heavy, there's this assumption that, obviously we're going to make it through, or kind of maybe Deus Ex Machina, because we want to get to be really badass, awesome heroes and adventurers or scoundrels and rogues. But RPGs were at their birth and origin war games, and harsh and difficult to beat. And especially you talk about first edition Dungeons and Dragons, there was a lot of cases about like, you open that door and there's a death trap and it comes up and it cuts your head off and you're done. And that was it. There was no roll against it. There was no, I have this ability. It was just your head got chopped off. So yeah. It's fun. It's funny that people would think that, I do have this overarching, story I want to tell. And this comes back to what we said a little bit earlier, this idea of like some people who come in at level 1 who's like, I'm the peasant boy who wants to become a knight, who are already planning when they're a knight and they have land and a manor and a wife and kids and the whole, like they're already planning that thing. But that's not necessarily how the game plays, because we add in the probability and the dice rolling or the card drawing or whatever it is that your system does, which can absolutely kill you.
Yeah, I think what me personally is that the first system I played was Legend of the Five Rings, and a good samurai story is tragic. So you kind of always have in the back of your mind that a good samurai story will end with death and destruction, or with people suffering, or that you will, because of part of the Bushi code, you will sacrifice yourself for your lord, for example.
Yeah, you've got a good point there as well. I mean, me having been to Japan and also a big fan of Japanese culture and stuff like that, to understand the Bushido code and also understand Japanese mythology and mentality, death is not very much something that's feared. Death is something you, as a samurai, should prepare for. And the belief is, if you go into battle, this is very contradictory to a lot of Western, especially American beliefs, is you should go into battle prepared to die, therefore you will succeed. Whereas the idea in, of American or Western cultures is like, you don't want to die, you fight like hell to do anything not to die. Don't accept, failure as an option. So as your character being a samurai, it kind of makes sense that they're like, I've chosen this path. Death is inevitable. It's going to happen either tomorrow or, next week or whatever. So when your character does die, you're like, well, that all makes sense inside the character.
Yeah. And the only thing that's was important in that specific campaign was, if I'm going to die, I have to die honorably. That was the main thing. So honor over death. And that really drove some interesting role-playing decisions, because my character, being a samurai detective, interesting combination, really good at putting out damage, but really bad at taking damage. So always first at the front line, and in the second combat round he was lying down on the floor bleeding.
A glass cannon, as they say.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It became kind of a running gag, because I think over 3 or 4 sessions in a row, he was nearly dying at the end.
So your Sherlock Hattori Hanzo character was having a hard time surviving. Interesting. Or it's Sherlock Musashi, I guess would be your case.
Yeah.
That's actually a really fun character build, and that's something I tell this to any aspiring GM. And I also tell this to players as well, is always assume that your GM is on your side, because I think as a GM, it's your job to try to make the people at the table have a good time and enable them to have a good time, but never take it personally when your character dies, because that has to be a part of the game. I never err on the side of thinking like, oh, well, he or she is out to get me. I'm like, no, they're trying to make a really interesting scenario, or really captivating, or hair raising, intense moment by giving you maybe a monster that's stronger than you anticipated, or you're not leveled for. I don't think they ever do it with the intent to kill you, but it is a very real reality.
Yeah, and we had a situation once around the table where the whole session broke down because someone got really upset because, well, my character can't do anything, and I know this is getting too difficult. And he or she got really attached to the characters we were playing, to the specific group, and was really getting afraid that the characters were going to die, and that brought the whole game to a complete standstill for an hour. And that's something I'm going, okay, yeah, I don't want to play Sims. I want to risk my life.
Yeah, because you want to play, I think most RPGs are power fantasy. We are here to play bigger and stronger of ourselves. And with that, most people also want to play grandiose adventures or swashbuckling, pirate seafaring tales, or like these big, bold, dramas and tragedies and epics. Very few people, I think, also want to come with the emotional baggage that comes with that life as well. Because we're still playing in like a Marvel universe version of this alt where it's like, all right, well, the world's going to be okay eventually and somehow and fine. Like, unless your game is specifically like grim, dark, dystopia, fantasy and stuff like that, you still have no kind of issue with the fact that you just ran through a room and slaughtered 15 people and then jumped into the room and did another 10. Like, you don't stop to take a moment about, like, we are beheading people, we're severing them in half. Like, this is grotesque and gore. But you kind of wave it off as, oh, well, we're heroes. It's what we do. Yeah,
but also, if there's no dice situations in the game, be it social or be it combat, those dice situations bring out the most juicy bits of the game. So that's where it gets emotional, or where you have to get creative to escape or survive, or trick the opposite side. So if there's no risk involved, doesn't have to be death, but if there's no risk involved, I think there's less drive to the game.
And I will say, as a GM watching my players react, some of the most memorable and the craziest moments are those moments to where, like, it finishes or it ends, and they either go, oh my god, I don't know how we're gonna get out, or I cannot believe we survived that, and holy shit, that was amazing. And, like, because if the answer is obvious, then it becomes a game of, like, okay, well, did I just deduce what the GM or DM wanted me to do, or what the best ability was or spell was, or the best play was? Whereas if it was one of those things to where on surface level they have no idea how the hell they get out of there, and through sheer spite and ingenuity and dumb luck sometimes they do, then that's super memorable. That's something you talk about for years.
Yeah, we had actually had a situation like that in the last game, for at least for my character. I had really good luck leveling up, rolling the hit point dice. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a fight and someone says, okay, I'm dealing out, then I'm going, okay, fine. I can take that. He's really gotten to be a tank. And it doesn't feel dangerous most of the fights. And then we scaled a mountain. And we were kind of like 2,000 meters up the mountain, sheer mountain. And then we got attacked by giant eagles. And suddenly it got even dangerous for my character because, I can take what the eagles can dish out, but if I lose my grip, I won't survive a 2,000-meter fall.
Yeah, there's always something bigger and scarier than you, regardless of how tanky your tank is.
Yeah, and that was the first fight that actually felt challenging for quite a while. So that was really fun. So that's where I'm going. That's why I'm saying, okay, there needs to be a bit of a risk to make the games memorable. Yeah.
So that ties into something here, but this is probably, whereas one of the easiest statements was the disagreeing with the GM in the middle of a game one. This is one of the hardest ones because I'm on both sides of this one. The game table is a safe space, and we didn't really come here for any sort of reality seeping into your game. Like, we want to keep the real world outside of the table. And this one I flip-flop on all the time. And I'm going to kind of start because I have thoughts on this. I am.
What do you mean by real world?
Sure. So
political issues.
So what I was meaning by this is, while it doesn't have to be current events, it's if you're dealing with, let's say, a suppressed minority group, the actions taken are reminiscent of what happened in reality. Or if you're dealing with people who are abducted or slaves, there's an abject, reality that sexual assault comes into that case, possibly rape comes into that case. When you talk about, so that's the things of, like, taking examples from the real world, or let's say genocide, right? Things like that. So this is the one that's so hard for me because there's a part of me that understands the idea of this is escapism. Like, this table is to get us away from the harshness and the reality. And the reference I made earlier about, the Marvel universe of, like, oh, well, everything will be resolved and retconned and everything will be okay. And, like, it's a little happy-go-lucky, nothing super high stakes. I kind of get that approach, and I totally understand that as well. But I think we are served so much better as storytellers and as people to be able to work through situations or scenarios that are difficult and are like that, and to have the ability to make a change. Because for me, some of the things I've been through in my life and things like that, a lot of what the horrors and atrocities that happen around the world I cannot control, or my impact was little to none. Whereas when I play these characters or I'm running these games, I give them the opportunity to make that difference. So if we're playing a heroes game, you have the ability to stop the slavers and free the people, or discontinue, the tyrannical reign of the horrible emperor because you defeat him or convince the people to overthrow him. So I'm so hard because I understand why nobody wants to be triggered by that or wants that darkness or reality to seep in, but at the same time I think we're better if we have it.
Oh, that's really interesting. The games I've played so far that has been kept out, at least on the conscious level. So there's no, as far as I can know, there was never a conscious design by the GM to bring in certain political or social topics. But watching some games, Critical Role is good, but I really prefer the stuff that on Geek and Sundry Campbell is doing with the Shield of Tomorrow and now Callisto 6. And he's always bringing in real-world stuff. And that makes for great storytelling. But on the other hand, so that's really fun to watch. I think it would be hard for me as a player to deal with it at times, to actually act out in that world. But on a much smaller scale, I think real world always seeps in because you have to make decisions as a player. And if it's a good game, you find some difficult decisions to make. That is real world stuff, no matter how you frame it.
Yeah, and so this is one that's such a hard one for me because when I've done it incorrectly or I've introduced it into a place where it hasn't worked, I got a reaction that was the antithesis of what I wanted, and I felt so bad for the people involved. And to kind of open up that anecdote a little bit, I was running games for people who were coming off of in a convention, so they were wanting to play, in the middle of the convention, and a lot of these people were possibly new people who were getting into RPGs that they never tried before. So I give them their pre-made character sheets and things like that. And I run them an adventure, which is, some podunk, middle of nowhere, rural town. And they just happenstance, they didn't tell them to pick. They picked the most exotic races and the most exotic, interesting people, mages and magic users and things like that. So throughout the adventure, all the common human simpletons would always remark about how strange and different they were. And they were bringing, what are you guys from the city, bringing from these strange lands? You have ancient magics and curses. And some people were anti, them because they're foreigners and different. And other people just didn't understand, why do you have horns? Are you some sort of demon or something? And I went through that kind of entire thing, and the adventure ends about 2 hours later, and I'm saying goodbye, to everybody. I hope you had a good time, enjoy your convention. And I had somebody come up to me who was playing the game and go, yeah, I had a good time. I enjoyed what you did. Because there was, I had an 8-year-old girl and a 60-something-year-old woman, both in my game, who were absolutely new, each on the opposite side of the spectrum. So I was trying to, somehow curtail the adventure to both of them at the same time and be a little bit rules light. I get towards the end, neither of them told me this, it was somebody else from the table, but I get towards the end and I'm asking them, thank you very much for coming out, enjoy the rest of your convention. And they go, yeah, I just didn't like that it was a little bit racist. And I was immediately hit with oh, wait, what? And then, I stopped and she's like, well, yeah, everybody was mentioning our race and who we were and our horns and the fact that we did magic and things like that. And I was like, oh my God, no, that was not my intention whatsoever. It was just because, in the lore, these are common humans and, tieflings are descendant of demons. And I'm trying to walk them through that. And I realized they didn't agree to that. They didn't understand the lore. Well, some of the people at the table were new. Some of the people have played before. They just wanted to play for some fun. But I didn't make that contract with everybody that that's the type of game I was going to run, and this is how the world interacts with your players and your races and your classes. So I immediately and this is something that eats me up all the time because I've told this story to my regular gaming group on Mondays who I do this with. My Monday group is oh, dude, it's totally fine. We love your game. We don't think you're a racist. You introduce these kind of concepts because it's storytelling. We get it. We're adults here. But I didn't have that conversation. I don't have the repertoire with the people at a random convention who are just randoms who come up to play. So I always felt like I did a giant disservice, and I'm worried. I'm still worried to this day that I possibly turned some people off from that game because I chose to run the game that way.
Yeah, this is really tying into a bigger conversation about how much responsibility lies with which party of the game. I mean, do you speak out about that? How much do you have to anticipate? You can't possibly know all the real world personal backstories of all your players and know all the stuff that will trigger them. And people will interpret whatever happens through their personal lens. So something that's completely innocent to you might be viewed through a different lens and be seen as a trigger. And it is a trigger for someone, or just offensive. So I find it really hard to. I'm on the fence really on how much responsibility falls on the GM in these cases, because if you enter this kind of game, I think as a player you also have a bit of a responsibility to have some kind of what is called a suspense of belief.
Yeah, suspense of disbelief. Yes.
Yeah, and you just roll with it, or if it really isn't for you, to just say, okay, time out. This isn't working for me. And yes, we talked about it. You shouldn't break the flow, but if it's really making you uncomfortable to the point where you can't enjoy the game, I think you should speak up.
Yeah, and I mean it's one of those times to where, like, I think I would have objectively, and I mean it's a bold thing to ask a person to do. I think, maybe I'm putting too much on my GM side, and I should have asked a little more of my players. But again, these were random people I didn't know. But it's one of those things to where I think moving forward, I would have told somebody, like, yeah, a rules issue, misremembering a spell, like, that's a thing to where, like, that's something we can resolve later or subtly. But if this is something that's personally offensive to you and affecting you so much, especially like that, I know it's very intimidating to be with a group of people to say, stop your fun. I have a problem with what's going on. But in that scenario, to where I had, again, just assumed or forgotten, was ignorant of that perspective, because that's just the type of game I played. I wish somebody would have spoke up. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't get the last bit.
I said I do wish somebody would have spoke up. Yeah.
I mean, so now you had the experience, and now in the next time you're running a game like that, you can set out that as an expectation or a rule, or just allow people to do that beforehand, before the game. I mean, you can't know everything. Some things you learn by experience as a player as well as a GM.
Yeah. Well, to go in the opposite direction and change the feelings here, the next statement is, do not be a joke. Make a serious character. Nobody, and this, subtitles, I just came up with, like, funny ideas. So, like, nobody wants to see a luchador in a Tolkien story. A Mexican wrestler, luchador, for those of you who don't know. Mm-hmm. Eminem, bard rapper, nobody wants your name to be YOLO or swag or all those funny hip terms and things like that, or whatever. So what do you think about comedy characters here as a player? Yes, no, maybe so?
I immediately went to a different place when you talked about the characters. So, but no, I'm.
What was the place you went to? I want to hear that first.
So I was going, okay, these can be totally serious characters. You just have to come up with the right backstory, why they have this name, or why they have this specific combination of things, or maybe they're just surface level, the class clown. But if you dig a little deeper, there's a reason why they're acting this way. But but I think we can maybe talk about that.
What I picked this one for, and I'm referencing with this one is I think it's the meta level joke. So a joke that like something that's humorous in world, which is justified, and then you can explain, or if your character is a comedian, like if that's their whole approach, or if they're maybe somebody who's also if you're evil, kind of like a Joker, like a dark humor sort of thing, or if you're just maybe even a nihilist who just thinks everything's a joke, so you're like, don't take anything seriously. I understand that from a character's perspective, but it's the thing of like, you want to make the joke because, it's a reference we all get, or, the guys get it. Like, that's a thing from the world, and I'm just saying it because it's there for the lols, And I think that ties into, what I want to talk about a little bit more was like sometimes going for like the easy joke that breaks the immersion. Like you see an opportunity and like, and then you go, that's what she said, or like something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think this going with, going to the improv theater background. So if you go with this is going to be really short form improv. So you make a joke and you stop the scene because, after this joke, nothing good will happen again in this scene. So I think these kind of comedic characters maybe are good for one-shots. If everyone agrees, okay, we're just having a laugh and we're just doing crazy stuff this evening. But I don't think they work for longer-term storytelling.
I'll have to say, like, when you mentioned the one-shot thing, like, some of the favorite comedy one-shots I've seen are absolutely ridiculous and over the top. There's one, anybody can, it's for free, I think it's on the DMs Guild, it's called The Knights of Flavorton, where it's basically Guy Fieri, who's, the Food Network character. He has a royal night order, and, like, you get a map of the city where it's, like, Gravy Lane, and all the references are food puns, all the knights are of I think of carbs and of cholesterol and like all these jokes where it's super over the top and everybody understands that. And because it's a one shot, it's a 2 to 3 hour adventure. It's funny. You guys have a lark. You go on past that. If this was a full length campaign, depending on how long your campaigns run, you'd hope that there was more substance. And that's kind of where my thing about joke characters is.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, the stuff I like the most to laugh about is when the humor comes out of the combination of character and situation. So when it grows organically, and jokes, kind of by definition, break the story flow. Because you're trying to get a punchline in, and you're trying to do certain things, and jokes by their very nature are kind of one of the shortest story forms we have. And with every joke, you're telling a mini story, and I think you're doing a disservice to the larger story if you pack in a lot of jokes, because then you're kind of disrupting the flow of the bigger story.
And if you're wanting to just have fun, like, here's the thing. I'll say in my own, like, devil's advocate against myself, if it's a moment where it's, like, improv to where there's a crazy funny scenario or something happens, so one person makes a crack, people start laughing, another person makes a crack again, and you're, joke on top of joke on top of joke, and everybody at the table's having a good time, that's a good, like, tension breaker. That's a good, just general moment for everybody to laugh, and that has a purpose, and that's fine, but if it's something that becomes where everybody's now ignoring the scenario and is then just trying to find another joke or another end, then you've lost the momentum.
Yeah, I think even my comedy tastes have changed over time. So stand-up comics. So I know that if I'm seeing someone who's just telling jokes on stage, kind of where you have this, okay, I'm trying to get for the highest laughter density possible, it's tiring. It's really, really tiring. But if someone has an organic flow to their show and it's a mixture of thoughtfulness and then the jokes come out of the way it is set up, it's much more satisfying and much more longer lasting entertainment.
That's not actually too dissimilar to, I think, how one-shots versus campaigns kind of work. I think the beauty of the one-shot is that it's a self-contained story. It's has your beginning and middle, end, and it's everything is as how big of an impact can I make. It very rarely is it super subtle because it cannot be elongated. It has to be done in one sitting, right, or maybe two sittings depending on how long it takes. But with the campaign, you have the ability to have everything slowly work its way up, create that gradual flow to where something maybe not as explosive as the grand twist of a one shot is typically a big boss battle or a big turn or somebody who's secretly an illusion or doppelganger or something like that. Whereas in a single session, maybe nothing happens. Maybe you just shopped. Maybe you just had conversation, RP'd, or just walked to the next town where the big action will start. But sometimes the biggest reveal is then just one of those small types of things of like, oh, then you return to the town and somebody's missing, which was a hook in maybe the case of a one shot. But to you is like, oh no, this character who I've made friends with for so long, or I've been worried about them, or they've said somebody's coming after him and now they're missing. That's a big moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it really depends on how seriously, I think that's the term you used in the beginning, how seriously a player takes a character. If they're really going in and invest themselves in the character, I think that kind of automatically prevents this joke gaming.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see where that works. We're chugging along the line here. Let's see we actually hit a lot of them already. It kind of works out perfectly. Oh, yeah, well, this one. So, your game should always be without any sort of fudging or lying about the dice from the GM or from the players. Yes or no?
Yes.
So you 100% rule as the roll is.
Yeah, I mean, you can. So I say, when the dice are rolled, the dice are kind of truths. So that's what we are dealing with, and that's where I talked about it already, where the risk comes in, and maybe even the fun. You can think a bit about how you interpret it, and you can think a bit about before the roll, how to set it up. So is there any way to gain an advantage or any way to make it easier for me to do it? But I'm very much a fan of doing public rolls. So just everyone sees what's happening, and then you deal with what is.
Because that's one of the ones I wanted to talk about, because having played online and in person, a lot of the times you can't bullshit in person. Obviously, everybody's rolling at the table. But if you ever played in an online game, unless you're all going natively through a software or a browser or something like that, there's a lot of people who bring in their dice and just go, clink. Oh, yeah, that was a 17. And there's a lot of trust there. And if possibly the person was like, I really don't want to die, or I really want to hit, they have all the means in the world to lie.
Yeah, but then again, why? That's what we talked about. Why play then in the first place? I mean, if you just play, I think you can't win at role playing. And this is very much, if you cheat with your dice, you're coming very much from the idea, I want to win at role playing. And that's just silly to me.
True, but remember, this is the kind of shift that's happened now in RPGs, and this kind of new Renaissance era that we're having now, where a lot of older players are coming back into it, or who have already stayed with it, are now meeting with new players who got into it from a more RPG from a more role-playing than game-centered, war game-centered approach. So there's a lot of people, and the reason I, again, brought this statement out was because I think there's a lot of people who almost want it just to be collective storytelling because they want to do the cool thing. And a die, unfortunately, sometimes, even with all the circumstances working in your favor and you have all the pluses and the bonuses and whatever, you can still roll the lowest value.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But but if you don't, if you can't deal with that, then maybe dice-based role-playing games aren't the right fit for you, or you should look for different system. I mean, I know the D&D is kind of the standard role-playing system because, well, it's just been around for a very long time, and with Critical Role, etc., it's gotten a huge boost again. But there are so many other role-playing systems out there that allow you to, even if they use dice, to do more of this collaborative role storytelling, and then maybe you just playing the wrong system for you. So, for example, the Doctor Who role-playing system has a very fun initiative system. So, and it goes, everyone whose action is to talk goes first. So, and that's no roles involved usually. So, if you want to talk, if you run, and everything that involves dice comes at the third or fourth place. So you really have a lot of possibilities to do other stuff that don't rely on dice. Or going back to the Legend of the Five Rings, you have ways to boost your rolls, or I think Fate does it as well with Fate points. So there are systems out there that allow you that have this kind of fudging built in.
Mm-hmm.
So you can fudge within the rules.
And there's a lot of opportunities too, like if you ever talk to any GM or DM who, most I think are towards the players, they want to help out the players. If there's something you're really worried about that, like, I don't like, the fact that it comes down to a die roll or maybe one die roll. I've had this happen, my anecdotes early on. I used to sum up conversations with a single die roll, a persuasion roll, or a charisma roll to be like, well, did they find you persuasive or did they find you not? And then it was kind of a big deal because they were speaking in front of what amounts to kind of like a Congress or, a council to get, a motion passed. And he spoke, he wrote out all the points he wanted to make ahead of time. So then he gave his bit. He made his roll. Wasn't very good. It didn't pass. He talked to me after the session. He was like, for everything that we did, for everything, like how important that was, could there have been more of those, like for each of my individual points, or maybe at different points of my conversation or when I was retorting back and forth with the counselors? Because I feel like all that coming, I think that was a 15, 20-minute part of our game. For that 15, 20 minutes, coming down to one roll, I felt like was unfair. And I was like, you know what? You made a good point. And I've now, since then, started instituting kind of the... one second. So I've now instituted sort of a flow mechanic of like, when things are going your way, you have to roll less because you've already got them on your side. When things are going against your way, you roll more because there's more points of contention. But ultimately, like, you're winning them over. You don't have to, win them over, maybe one more good roll, and they're on your side. But if you start off on a bad foot, now you're playing catch-up. Now you're going to have to make a lot more good points. So I've started using that thanks to that feedback I got.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if it's Fate or if it's the Cypher system that has a really interesting concept. You can choose to succeed at a cost.
I think it's Fate because there's like success but one negative, or like negative but one positive, or something like failure and one positive, or something like that.
Again, I think there's a system. I don't know. I think maybe that's Cypher where you can kind of, if it's really, really important to you, and even when you lost the roll, you kind of say, okay, I want to succeed, but at a cost. And then, yes, you succeeded with a specific check. So he gave a good talk in front of the Senate or whatever. But there will be a cost in the long run. Or there will be an immediate consequence because there's someone in the Senate he really, really pissed off, and now he has an enemy.
And that's an absolute good way of playing that. And a lot of these answers, by the way, are coming down to if the system you're running does not allow you to do the thing you want, there are more systems. There's more, in my case, it can be done if you talk to your GM or DM. So that's a big approach as well, and I like that. We still talk for quite some time, but we're coming close to the end. So I'll pick the one that I think was going to be the juiciest one, especially to talk about. Your character should have a voice or other aspects of it that you have to act out. It is a role-playing game.
No. You should be able to act out your character, but I don't think you should demand of a player to put on a voice or to have a certain mannerisms at the table. If it helps, yes, by all means, but not everyone's able to do it. But you should be able to play at a character, and even if you sketch it. I mean, if you're getting drunk, maybe put on a bit of a slurry voice. But if I'm really, really bad at accents. I can't do them at all.
You've got a great German accent right now. I just want you to know.
Sorry, what?
You have a fantastic German accent right now. I just want you to
know. If someone said, "Okay, come to the table, but you have to be, but your character has to speak with a Bavarian accent," I would go, "Nope, sorry, not playing." I think that's putting a. It depends on the table, on the group, but it can be too high a hurdle for new players.
You hit the nail on the head. I think that's the hardest thing first for new players, because they are new to a game. It's probably a weird experience, and again, like I said, 99% are probably not actors, or actually maybe 98%. I don't know how many are actors, but the vast majority aren't. So I can understand the apprehension of doing that, and maybe that's not the way you like to play. Like, if you were more war game than role-playing game, as it was back in the day, you probably didn't worry so much about how good my Scottish accent was. You worried more about, like, I need this hit to, or we're not going to fell this monster and we're all going to die. Like, I get that. But I will make the one caveat that I will demand that there's something different about you and your character, so at the table I can differentiate when you're speaking as yourself or when you're speaking as your character. Now, you don't have to have an accent. You don't have to put on, like a slouch or a kind of sluggish demeanor, like you're about to be drunk or fall over. But you have to do something different that tells me that I know I'm talking to the character, because I'm going to roleplay. And I've always said this, the easiest thing we have is language. So even if you just change the rhythm, the pitch, the words you use, or if you all of a sudden begin to speak with a stutter or a weird Alan Rickman sort of thing, that is good enough for me.
Yeah, I agree. That's really good. I mean, I've been in groups where we don't do it at all, or where there's no conscious decision within the group to do it, and I think that makes the role playing a bit more difficult, because then you start to. It's not just for the others, but also for yourself. If you consciously put on something, like you described, it makes it easier for yourself to differentiate between in character and out of character. And if you demand it from everyone to be in character at the table, I think that makes for a better game. And the longest running group I've been in, there has never been the discussion about that. And we have sessions that run absolutely smoothly, and we have sessions where I get away from the table and I'm at the train back home after sitting together and playing together for 8 hours with some breaks. And I'm wondering, nothing memorable happened today, and we kind of a lot of outside stuff interfered, and that's not the outside stuff we were talking before. It's just like, okay, oh yeah, did you by the way, this comes up, and people talking privately. And I think that's a bit sad, because we're making all time to play together. And if you want to talk privately, yes, we can make time before and after and in the breaks. But if it's playtime, it's playtime. That's the way I like it. I know that not everyone likes it, but that for me makes for the best games.
Yeah, and like I said, we had a bunch of more statements we got to go through, metagaming, things like that. But this may be actually another means to get in another episode with you as well, Jens. But if people did want to talk to you, find you on the internet, what would be the best means?
The best way to reach me on the internet is via Twitter. So it's at Mr. Rock'n'Roll. And yeah.
And if you want to send a message to us for this podcast, the Gmail is myrpgpodcast@gmail.com. My personal Twitter is @classy_Don. You can find this podcast on Podbean, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are found. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at the table.